This video was made possible thanks to the support of our amazing patrons. We couldn't do this without you.
Don't forget that you can support the channel for free and receive 10% off orders over $10 at Flipside Gaming by using the promo code Affinity at the checkout. Or if TCG Player or Magic Madhouse are more your thing, then be sure to place your order through our affiliate links in the description. Once again, at no extra cost to yourselves.
Hello everybody and welcome to another EDH gameplay video brought to you by Affinity for Commander. My name is Martin.
And my name is Alex.
For today's game we are joined by Angelo, a writer for EDHrec.com who is totally obsessed with Jeskai commanders, as well as Scott, better known as Savantia on the interwebs. We had a cracking time playing with these lads and can't wait to show you the super fun game that we had. So without further ado, let's take a look at those opening hands.
I am playing my Heliod Sun Crowned Life Gain deck, and keep a hand containing Mana Tithe, Vadrok Champion, Endless Atlas, Pristine Talisman, Solemn Simulacrum, and 2 Planes.
I am playing my Feldon of the Third Path Reanimator deck, and keep an opening hand consisting of Faithless Looting, Zealous Conscripts, Wild Celebrants, Emrakul the Promised End, Eldrazi Temple, Gaia Reach Sanitarium, and Spirerock Knoll.
Angelo is playing his Vadrok Apex of Thunder Flicker deck, and starts the game with a hand of Soul Ring, Charming Prince, God Eternal Ketra, Time Wipe, Temple of Triumph, Hallowed Fountain, and Mystic Monastery.
And finally, Scott is playing his Anowon the Ruined Thief Rogue Tribal deck. His opening hand is made up of Sliverblade, Glint Sleeve Siphoner, Marsh Flitter, Silumgar's Command, Scourge of Fleets, an Island, and a Swamp.
Angelo wins the Dyro and starts things off by playing Mystic Monastery. With access to all 3 of his deck's colours next turn, he passes to Martin.
I play Spirerock Knoll, exiling one of the top 4 cards of my library under the land. With nothing more to do, I pass the turn.
I play a Plains, and with no turn 1 plays, end my turn.
Scott plays an Island and casts Slitherblade, not to be confused with Blade Slither. Unable to attack, he passes to Angelo.
Angelo plays Temple of Triumph, leaving the top card of his library where it is with his Scry trigger. Next he casts Soul Ring, literally doubling the mana at his disposal, and passes the turn.
I play Eldrazi Temple and then cast Faithless Looting. I draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, and end my turn.
I play another Plains and cast Vadrok Champion. Out of mana, I pass to Scott.
Scott starts his turn by moving straight to combat, dealing 1 damage to Angelo with his Scaly Boy. He then moves to his second main phase where he plays Temple of Deceit, keeping the top card of his deck where it is. With no further plays, Scott passes the turn.
Angelo plays Command Tower and casts God Eternal Ketra. Not bad for turn 3 really. I gain a life thanks to my champion, which I remember to display on screen in Scott's upkeep, and Angelo ends his turn.
In my turn I cast Cathartic Reunion, discarding 2 cards and drawing 3. I then play a Mountain and pass to Alex.
I play Nixthos Shrine to Nyx, which I then use to help cast Pristine Talisman. Not wanting to leave myself open to Angelo's zombie cat god, I decide not to attack, and instead pass the turn.
Scott plays a Swamp and casts Dimir Locket. Next he moves to combat, attacking Alex with his unblockable Naga, and ends his turn.
Angelo begins his turn by casting Talisman of Progress, leaving Martin as the only player without a mana producing artifact. He then plays Hallowed Fountain, paying 2 life to enter untapped, and casts Charming Prince, scrying 2 with his ETB. Oketra triggers, creating a 4/4 zombie warrior token of vigilance, and I gain 2 life thanks to Vadrok Champion. Moving to combat, Angelo gets his revenge on Scott for attacking him earlier, dealing him 6 damage with his undead cat god. Satisfied with his turn, he then passes to Martin.
I play a Mountain and cast my commander, Feldon of the Third Path. Alex gains a life when the Artificer enters the battlefield, and I then pass the turn. Alex responds to this by tapping his Talisman, gaining a life, and then proceeding to his untap step.
I play Rogue's Passage and then cast my commander, Heliod Sun Crowned. He enters the battlefield as an enchantment, given that my devotion to white is only 3, and I end my turn.
Scott plays a swamp and Angelo informs him that any acts of aggression towards him will be met with further punishment. Scott acknowledges that he understands this, moves to combat and attacks me with his Snake Man instead. How rude. In his post-combat main phase, Scott casts Glint's Sleeve Siphoner, gaining an energy with her ETB. Alex then gains a life and Heliod's ability triggers, allowing Alex to put a +1/+1 counter on his champion. With nothing more to do, Scott passes to Angelo, who responds by flashing in Stonecloaker. He chooses to return the gargoyle to his hand with its first ability and exiles the Zealous Conscripts in my graveyard with its second. Maketra then triggers, creating a 4/4 zombie, and Alex gains 2 life from the creatures that enter the battlefield. He puts 2 more +1/+1 counters on his creature, and I point out that these life gain shenanigans are going to get out of hand very quickly. With no further interruptions, Angelo moves to his turn.
Angelo wastes no time in his turn and moves straight to combat. He attacks Martin with Charming Prince, me with a Maketra, and Scott with both of his zombies. Suspicious of Angelo's open mana, Martin decides not to block the 2/2 coming at him with his 2/3 creature. Scott and I also declare no blocks and damage then occurs, where Martin takes 2, I take 6, and Scott takes 8. Confident with his position in the game, Angelo passes the turn.
I play a mountain and then cast a god of my own, Ilhog the Raiseboar. Not liking the idea of being the only player without a deity on their board, Scott counters the little piggy with soul manipulation. I cry a little, put Ilhog into my graveyard, and reluctantly end my turn. Alex responds to this by tapping his talisman, gaining a life and putting a +1/+1 counter on Heliod. He then moves to his untap step.
I start my turn by casting Orescus Explorer, searching my library for a single plains and putting it into my hand with the cat's ability. I then gain a life, put a +1/+1 counter on my commander, and play the plains before tapping my talisman and repeating the process once more. Next I use Nykthos to add 4 white mana to my mana pool, which I use to cast Solemn Simulacrum. I gain another life, put a +1/+1 counter on my Explorer, and put a plains into play tapped from my library. Lacking the mana to cast any more spells, I pass to Scott.
Scott plays Fetid Pools and laments the state of his board compared to Alex and Angelo's. Once finished sobbing, he casts his commander, Anowon the Ruin Thief. Alex misses his champion's trigger, which is his own fault for not paying attention, and Scott moves to combat. He attacks Angelo with his unblockable Naga and me with his Siphoner, who I am unable to block given that she has Menace. Angelo takes 2 damage, I take 3, and Scott gains a second energy thanks to his Glint Sleeves ability. Angelo then mills 2 cards and I mill 3 as a result of Anowon's ability. Angelo mills a creature, but I do not, and Scott draws a single card. He then passes the turn and Angelo responds by flashing in Stonecloaker for a second time. He makes a zombie with a Maketra and Alex remembers his triggers this time. He gains 2 life, puts 2 +1/+1 counters on his kitty, and Angelo exiles the soul manipulation in Scott's graveyard before returning the gargoyle to his hand. Angelo then recasts Stonecloaker, creating another zombie and gaining Alex 2 more life. Alex divides the 2 +1/+1 counters between his champion and his explorer, and I ask Angelo not to exile the Bull God in my graveyard so that I can use him to deal Alex some damage in my turn. Angelo accepts my offer, instead exiling my Lightning Greaves and returns Stonecloaker to his hand once again. Out of mana, Angelo proceeds to his turn.
In his turn, Angelo casts Siren's Ruse, flickering his Charming Prince. I gain a life when the noble re-enters the battlefield, putting a +1/+1 counter on Heliod, and Angelo chooses to scry 2 with his ETB. Not yet finished, Angelo casts his commander, Vadrok Apex of Thunder, for its mutate cost. He combines the elemental dinosaur cat to his zombie god, making her an actual cat god, and casts the Siren's Ruse in his graveyard without paying for it. Angelo once again flickers his prince, scrying 2, and I gain yet another life and put another +1/+1 counter on my commander. Angelo then moves to combat and declares his intent to attack me with his mutant creature. I remind him that I have a 10/10 commander and a rogue's passage, but this threat fails to deter him. Not finished declaring attackers, Angelo also sends 2 zombies at Martin and 2 more zombies at Scott. None of us block, Martin and Scott take 8 and I take 6. The rest of us then make a truce until Angelo is no longer a threat, and a worried looking Angelo ends his turn.
I begin my turn by playing Gaia Reach Sanitarium, and then tap out to cast Combustible Gear Hulk. Alex gains a life, puts a +1/+1 counter on his commander, and I target Angelo with the Robot CTB. Knowing that my deck contains a lot of high CMC creatures, Angelo chooses to let me draw 3 cards rather than mill them. A wise decision, I must admit. Unable to cast anything else, I pass to Alex.
In my turn, I cast Soul Warden, gaining a life and putting a +1/+1 counter on Heliod. My devotion to white finally reaches 5, turning a Heliod into a 12/12 creature, and I then cast Endless Atlas, providing me with some much needed draw power. I gain a life from tapping Pristine Talisman, putting another +1/+1 counter on Heliod, and then move to combat. Here I attack Angelo with my 5/5 Iraq champion, who conveniently has protection from black. Angelo blocks the cleric with his prince, and I then pass the turn.
In his upkeep, Scott pays 2 energy to draw a card, losing a life in the process. He then draws for turn, weeps in despair at the position he finds himself in, and asks Alex if he'll let one of his creatures hit him so that he can potentially draw a card. Taking pity on the Irishman, Alex agrees to let a single creature hit him, and a joyous Scott moves to combat. He attacks Angelo with Sliverblade and Alex with Glint Sleeve Siphoner, gaining an energy with the Siphoner's ability. Angelo takes 2, Alex takes 3, and both players mill cards equal to the damage that they took. Both players mill a creature, and a very happy Scott draws 2 cards. In his second main phase, Scott plays an island and falls back into his pit of despair. Oh dear. He casts Looter Ilkor, and Alex gains 2 life, one from his champion and the other from his warden. This gives him 2 separate Heliod triggers, allowing him to put 2 +1/+1 counters on the god, and Scott ends his turn.
Angelo once again moves straight to combat, attacking me with his Vadrok or Kedra hybrid, Martin with 2 zombies, and Scott with 2 zombies as well. Martin blocks one of the zombies coming at him with his Gear Hulk, Scott blocks a zombie coming his way with his Looter, and I am unable to block the flying amalgamation that's attacking me. Martin and Scott then take 4 damage, I take 6, and Angelo moves to his post-combat main phase. Not wanting to lose to commander damage from Heliod in my turn, he casts Time Wipe, returning his mutated creature to his hand. I respond by tapping Nykthos, floating 5 mana, and the board is then wiped. Heliod ceases to be a creature now that he has no one around to worship him, and I draw a card when my sad robot hits the graveyard. Angelo then passes to Martin, and I respond by using my floating mana to cast Faith's Reward. Not wanting me to get all of my destroyed creatures back, Scott responds to this by casting Silumgar's Command. He chooses to counter the spell and return Heliod to my hand, but I respond to this by casting Mana Tithe, which Scott doesn't have enough mana to pay for. Sorry Scott, but the control player and me just can't build a deck without counter spells, even in mono white. The command is countered, Faith's Reward resolves, and I return all 4 of my creatures that were destroyed with Time Wipe to the battlefield. I gain 3 life from Soul Warden, 3 life from Iraq Champion, and put 6 +1/+1 counters on Heliod, who becomes a creature once again thanks to the support from his returned devotees. Oreska's Explorer ability triggers, but none of my opponents control more lands than me, so nothing happens. I then search my library for a Plains and put its interplay tapped thanks to Solemn Simulacrum, and Martin begins his turn.
I start my turn by flashing back Faithless Looting, drawing 2 cards and discarding 2 cards. I can totally understand why this spell got banned in Modern now. Next I cast Mind Stone and pass the turn with nothing but a brain-shaped rock on my board.
I play a Plains and then move to combat. I watch the sweat drip from Angelo's brow as I attack him with my 21 powered commander and enjoy the sight of him scooping up his cards as he takes a lethal dose of commander damage. Praise the sun, God. In my post-combat main phase, I tap my Atlas to draw a card, and then cast Heliod's #1 fan, Sun Titan. I mean, he even has Theros artwork in one of his printings. I return the authority of the consoles in my graveyard to the battlefield with the Giant's ETB, which causes Martin to curse me and my deck. Looks like all of those robots Feldon makes will now come in tapped. Happy with what I've accomplished, I end my turn.
Scott starts his turn by casting Soul Ring, which everybody agrees is a stellar play at this stage in the game. Next he casts Witchclaw Talisman, instantly removing a wish counter from the creepy looking hand and activating its ability. Scott searches his library for a card, puts it into his hand, and donates the Tutoring Monkey Paw to me. How thoughtful. I pray to all the Theros gods except for Heliod that he search for a board wipe or exile spell for Heliod, and Scott passes the turn to me.
Martin activates Scott's Witchclaw Talisman, removing a wish counter from it and returning the artifact to its owner. He searches his library for a card, reveals it to be duplicate, and then casts the shape-shifting automaton. The robot enters tapped, and I gain 3 life thanks to the combined effects of Authority of the Consuls, Soul Warden, and IROC Champion. I put 3+1/+1 counters on the aforementioned champion, and Martin targets Heliod with the duplicate's ETB. Unable to stop this from happening, I reluctantly pick up my commander and put him in the command zone, prompting cheers of joy from both Martin and Scott. Unable to do anything else, Martin discards down to 7 and passes the turn.
Alex begins his turn by cycling Secluded Step and then moves to combat. He attacks Scott with all of his creatures except for his Warden, returning the Burnished Heart in his graveyard to the battlefield of his Titan's ability. Not ready to lose the game just yet, Scott responds by casting Aetherize, returning Alex's attacking creatures to his hand. Alex then gains 2 life from his Soul Sisters effects and moves to his second main phase. Here he casts Blind Obedience, making doubly sure that Scott and I can't play untapped creatures, and recasts IROC Champion. He extorts the spell with Blind Obedience, draining a life from Scott and myself and gaining yet another life from Soul Warden. Still not finished, Alex taps his Talisman to gain a life, and then uses his Nykthos to produce 5 white mana. He uses 4 of this to recast Solemn Simulacrum and uses the remaining mana to extort the spell, draining Scott and I for another life. Alex then gains a life from his Warden, a life from his Champion, and puts a Plains into play from his library with the Sad Robot CTB. Finally finished rebuilding his board state, Alex passes to Scott.
Scott removes the final wish counter from Witchclaw Talisman, shifting control of the now useless artifact to Martin. He then searches his library for a card, puts it into his hand, and plays River of Tears, an oddly appropriate card on reflecting how Scott is feeling right now. Next he casts Ingarrick's Wake, completely wiping the board of creatures, and passes the turn.
I start my turn by casting Emrakul the Promised End, causing both of my opponents to feel a deep sense of dread as the giant tentacle monster hits the battlefield. I choose to gain control of Alex during his next turn with the Eldrazi Titan's cast trigger, and then use the last of my mana to cast Gamble. I search my library for a card, put it into my hand, and have Scott choose a card at random from my hand for me to discard. Dreamstone Hedron is put into my graveyard this way, and I run into the next room to take control of Alex during his turn.
Martin begins my turn by casting Blessed Alliance, targeting himself with its gain 4 life ability. Now that is a cheeky play if I've ever seen one. Unable to mess up my turn any further, Martin ends my turn and I move to my extra turn.
Alex plays a Plains, recasts Sun Titan, and extorts the spell. Scott and I each lose a life, Alex gains 2, and Sun Titan's trigger returns IROC Champion to the battlefield. Next Alex taps Pristine Talisman, gaining a life and using Nykthos to add 6 white mana to his mana pool. He uses this mana to cast Ereskos Explorer and Suture Priest, extorting both of the spells to drain the rest of us for 2 life each. Alex then gains 2 life from the champion, and Ereskos Explorer's ETB once again does nothing, given that Alex has the most lands out of all of us. Happy with his rebuilt board, Alex passes to Scott.
Scott plays an island and casts Sir Conrad the Grim. Suture Priest triggers, causing Scott to lose a life, and Authority of the Consuls and IROC Champion both gaining me a life. Next, Scott activates his Knight's ability, causing each of us to mill a card. Both Scott and Martin mill a creature, causing Sir Conrad to deal 2 damage to Martin and myself. Not yet finished, Scott activates his Knight's ability for a second time, but this time, Martin is the only one of us to mill a creature. I take 1, Martin takes 1, and Scott uses the last of his mana to cast Feed the Swarm, targeting Emrakul. Martin questions what the heck Scott is thinking, and Scott replies by telling us that he has no way to deal with me, and would prefer to lose the game taking down one of the most powerful beings in the multiverse with a swarm of insects. Emrakul is then destroyed and Scott loses 13 life, knocking him out of the game. Everyone has a good laugh about Emrakul being afraid of bugs, and Martin proceeds to his turn.
Knowing that I need to deal with Alex's life gaining weenies to have any chance of pulling this game back, I spend all of my mana to cast Drakuseth, Maw of Flames. I lose a life to Suture Priest and Alex gains 2 from this champion and his authority. I then calculate that I should have just enough life to survive an all-out swing from Alex's creatures, and pass the turn.
In my turn, I tap Nykthos to float 8 white mana and recast my commander. I extort the spell, draining Martin for a life, and gain 2 from the combined effects of my priest and champion. Heliod then triggers and I put 2+1/+1 counters on Sun Titan. Next I cast Wayfarer's Bauble, extorting the artifact and draining Martin for yet another life. I put a +1/+1 counter on my Titan with Heliod's ability, and then cast Ajani Steadfast. I extort the Leonin Planeswalker, draining yet another life from Martin, and putting another +1/+1 counter on my Giant. I activate Ajani's +1 ability, giving Sun Titan +1/+1, First Strike, Vigilance and Lifelink, and tap my Talisman to gain another life for good measure. I put a +1/+1 counter on, you guessed it, Sun Titan, and then finally move to combat. I attack Martin with all of my creatures, dealing him lethal damage, and bring this game to a close.
Well, that's it for another game. We hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did. We'd once again like to thank Scott and Angelo for joining us, and we cannot wait to have a rematch with them. Don't forget that you can help to support the channel in 4 quick and easy ways: liking this video, subscribing, hitting that bell icon, and leaving us a comment. I read every one. And if you really like us, then consider checking out our Patreon page, where you can find exclusive rewards such as custom tokens and playmats for as little as $1 a month. That's all for now though, we'll see you next time.